Okay, thank you for coming along to this session. My name is Mike, and I'm one of the product managers with the Oracle Analytics Group, and I'm joined by my friend and Oracle partner, Stuart Bryson, who, if anyone follows me on Twitter, I believe is actually the James Brown of Kscope. I was looking at the Twitter feed, and it's like Stuart's doing this, Stuart's doing that, and he's in this other session, and I'm like, he's not going to have any energy by the time he gets to 3:30. So we're going to be talking, it's going to be a slightly different session to the style that you're normally used to. We're going to be talking a bit more about how you may be able to integrate some ideas from the world of storytelling and also visual design, those kind of principles, into the work that you're doing with your analytics reports. So we pretty much all know what data visualization is. It's about creating charts, graphs, dashboards. And one of the key things about the visualization is it helps people, which are us, we're people, understand data using this notion of visual analysis. Now, to take it to the next level, you can add a narrative in order to start telling the story of your data. And essentially, these notions of patterns or trends tend to be much easier understood visually. And then if you add a narrative, you've got a very powerful mechanism for putting a message across. So I'm going to start off by telling you a story about me. So we often meet people who have Fitbits. Hands up who's got a Fitbit, who tracks steps. So we talk about this notion of the quantified self. So today I could tell you that I've walked nearly 7,000 steps. I don't know how accurate that is, but whenever you go to a conference like this, I was at Collaborate. Anybody at Collaborate in April? Enormous. I was doing like 15,000 steps a day, whereas I'd normally do about 8. So, this notion of being able to track information and data, and I could tell you right now that my heart rate is 105 BPM. But, if I've got that heart rate tracked over time, then I could give you a story based on that heart rate data. This is when I got up, my heart rate rose. This is when I went up staircase and it went through the roof. However, I've got this kind of idea, see what you think, that really the ultimate in quantifying yourself is really DNA. So that's my proposal. DNA is the ultimate quantified self. So you're thinking, why are you talking about DNA, Mike? This is an analytics session. Okay, so we're talking about data telling a story. So data is really, that's a visual representation of the data that makes up us as humans. Now, one of my interests is really how you can take information from sports technology. So you've probably heard of Garmin or Polar. You go out for a bike ride or go out for a run, and you can track information about that. So of an age where I was thinking about getting fit, losing a bit of weight, and I thought, well, I don't really want to waste time in going and doing the wrong sort of training, because there's so many different ways of doing training. You've probably heard of aerobic training, you've heard of high intensity training, and they'll all get you fit, but depending on how your body's made up and your genetic profile, you can be more responsive to different types of training. So I thought, okay, well, I'll get a DNA test done. And I'll find out how my body, how my DNA is going to help me respond to the training. So the data that came back from that, this was how it was presented. There was quite a lot of data. This was telling me that I could get fit. So this VO2 max response, luckily, said you can actually improve your fitness by training. However, you have a high injury risk, so don't overdo it. And then on the bottom, if you're interested in this kind of area, you may be interested in actually building out a training plan yourself. So using the metrics, looking at your heart rate, bringing all that together, and it's saying, well, I've got a medium recovery speed. So from that information that's been presented, based on the data that I was gathered from the DNA sample, I have a picture of how I can start to build a training plan. So that's all well and good. All right, so I was expecting that in some cases the DNA would tell me that I was Usain Bolt. So What do I mean by that? So when I was at school, I used to do athletics, but I was a sprinter. So I kind of was wondering, or whether the DNA test would confirm, there's something that's called a sprint gene, ACTN3. Now, it's not as simple as saying you have the sprint gene, therefore you are now Usain Bolt, and there are so many other factors that come into play with respect to your genetic makeup. However, typically, if you do feel like you are a sprinter, then you may have that gene, which I did. So the DNA test did show that I had the appropriate DNA to sprint. However, there was quite a big surprise when I got the result back. And that was that I actually had a higher endurance profile than the power sprint profile. So that knocked me over a little bit, really. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe I could put this to the test, and fortuitously there was a cycling endurance challenge the following year, which I thought I'd sign up for. Okay, so I've talked to you about data, I've talked to you about how you can visualize it, how you can interpret data, and the notion of DNA being the ultimate quantified self. So let me talk about this endurance challenge. So that's what the endurance challenge looks like. Now you're like thinking, okay, what is that? It's called the Dragon Ride, and it takes part in South Wales in June. You're like thinking, well, is that a dragon? It looks more like a witch. Is it the witch ride? However, what's really important with data visualization is the actual context of what you're showing. So I've got a number of examples of that. So if I put that onto a map, you can now start to get a sense of how that ride is playing out. There's a scale at the bottom, and those of you who've got Superman's eyesight will be able to read that. However, I'll help you out, and that route is 230 kilometers. So you've got a guy who used to think he was a sprinter, but has discovered that he may have some DNA endurance genes, suddenly signing up for a 230 kilometer ride, which in old money is around 146 miles. Okay. However, it's not flat. So nothing in cycling is ever flat, especially in South Wales. Okay, so this is showing the profile of that ride. And again, what we're doing here is data visualization. This is the profile, the height of the ride. It's annotated. Immediately you're thinking, okay, that looks quite high, and just because you can't read it, it's actually 10,000 feet of ascent. Okay, so we've built up a picture of the quantified self signing up for an endurance challenge, and we've set out what that challenge is in terms of specific data, and we've got some interesting visualizations which kind of can really set out what that challenge is. All right, so this is not the bike that I was doing the ride on. However, anyone cyclists in the audience? I know Stuart is. Okay, so cycling is really great as a sport if you are into collecting data. So you would think, okay, you can say how fast you're going. What else? All right, so you've got speed. Yeah, that's pretty important. That tells you, obviously, how long it's going to take you to get around. You could have average speed, so, that's just two metrics that we've come up with just from there. So power is an interesting one. So this is a very key metric for training, because this is literally how much effort you are putting out on the bike. And it's a very accurate way of explaining how much effort you are putting out. So it's a good metric to use for training. So we've got power and average power as well. So cadence. How quickly are you spinning the pedals? And I believe that the company that I work for recently may have lost the America's Cup to Team New Zealand, who I believe made use of an innovative way of cranking their hydraulics or power or whatever it is, and they were actually using a pedal-driven system and they were using their legs as opposed to using their arms. So I think that was probably one sort of strong reason why they were so strong. Heart rate, yeah. So I've already mentioned that I've got my heart rate. And what you're trying to do when you're training and planning for a long ride is to work out what the optimum combination of these are. So you want a high cadence. You don't want to push your heart rate too high, and you want to go as fast as you can. Temperature. So that's going to have a big impact. Yeah. So I'm from the UK. We actually had a heat wave conveniently last week. So I was sort of acclimatized to come out to Texas. However, you still open the door and it's like, whoosh, that's really hot. So that takes into account climbing. So how far have you climbed? We said it was 10,000 feet. So, as part of the training, you want to be able to go up as many hills as you can, as quickly as you can. And then you've got your total ascent and then descent. And hopefully those two metrics will be equivalent and cancel each other out, or you'll find yourself kind of hovering somewhere around the ground. And then how long the ride took. So these are basically a set of basic metrics that you can gather from cycling. So there's a lot of data, and that's kind of what it looks like in its raw form. As it comes off the, in this particular case, a Garmin head unit based on all the sensors, this is kind of what it looks like in its raw form. Okay, so data visualization, let's put that into a tool which allows you to see what that data looks like. And, to be honest, it looks like the sort of thing that you find in an ER. There's a lot of information on there. You can kind of, not really make much sense of it at all, to be honest. Along the top, you can see the profile of a given ride. But, you can kind of see there's some box plots on the left-hand side. So that's much, much better, obviously, than the raw data that we just saw in the XML file. So we're starting to get somewhere. We can start to see maybe some trends. We can see that where we've slowed down, where we've sped up, where we've maybe got a correlation between going faster downhill, etc., etc. So let's take that data and put it onto a map. So this is now giving you a bit more information based on that data. So you can see we've moved away now from the raw numbers, and we're actually going into more of a pure visualization. So you can see the route, you can see that I went through a forest, you can see that there was an airport. So again, you're getting a lot of information about the context of where that ride took place. Now, one of the key messages that I'd like to get over, and a suggestion to make to you, is that data visualization is so important when presenting data and this notion of telling the story of that data. All I need to do is make a very, very, very small change to how that data is presented, and you will start to see that data in a new light. So you see, okay, so there was quite a hilly ride. The blue bits are where I was fast, and there's some red bits just down the front there where it was extremely steep. So hopefully you're starting to see that just by taking some raw data, presenting it in different ways, can start to give you a lot of insight into what that data is telling you. And then really we see these things called infographics all over the place, and these are ways of taking data and presenting it in a form which will essentially let it hit home what that data means. So this is the result of my yearly training for that. So in terms of the distance, it was like going from London to Athens. So you're going to go, okay, that's a long way. And in terms of climbing, nearly just over twice up the height of Everest. So that's basically what an infographic does. It really gives you the context of that information. So to end that story, this was a picture taken on the ride in South Wales. Absolutely beautiful countryside. It's kind of where I'm from originally. And they give you a nice certificate at the end of it just to say that you got around. So anyway, that's the dragon ride. All right, so moving on and looking at some of the influences and some of the ideas that we can all apply. And I'll sort of share some of the information that I've been kind of researching. Hopefully you'll find it useful as well. So has anybody seen the presentations by Hans Rosling, who sadly died earlier this year? So he was really a pioneer in the form of data visualization. And this TED talk, he talks about the notion of healthcare throughout the world. And apparently I'd read that Bill Gates's philanthropy was actually influenced by some of the presentations that Hans Rosling did. So that's like a very, very important impact and result from these types of presentations. And what was quite innovative about these is that they were on a timeline. So that chart there where it says 1993, he'd go through the years and you'd see the data points move around on that particular chart. So you could start to see the impact that improvements or in healthcare in certain areas of the world were having. So I would certainly recommend looking at that to kind of inspire you in your own data visualization efforts and data storytelling. Coming back to infographics, I tweeted out earlier, what would you suggest would be the ultimate infographic? And my take on this is, hey, how about this? If you're looking at how you can represent data in a form that's kind of clear to understand, that gives you information about that data, how it relates to other aspects of that data, then I think this is a very powerful visualization. So this is obviously the Mercator projection of the world. However, interestingly, as useful and as important as it is, it's a very representative view of that data. It's not an accurate representation of how the world is in real life, obviously. So a couple of other sort of resources. There's a Reddit called Data is Beautiful. So people put out different types of data visualizations, publish them on here. And it's kind of great, just kind of for getting inspiration really as to how people are presenting different types of data. And what's interesting is that this notion of data storytelling is becoming more, I was going to say more real, but the notion that you get articles where people are talking about data storytelling or data journalism. You have jobs where people are advertising and actually using the term data storytelling or data journalism. But what's kind of interesting is that with all these types of jobs, they have got skills which are a combination of analytic skills. Everything's about using Excel and experience with Excel. But what's interesting is that they actually talk about experience with data design and graphic design or end user interface design. So you've got this suddenly you've got this combination of artistic type skills with analytic type skills. And we've spoken for a long time about the data scientist as being an elusive blend of skills. If you want to bring in artistic design to that as well, then something's going to be even more rare. So you can see that a data storyteller is probably going to work alongside data scientists and business users to present that data in an interesting manner, which is going to keep you intrigued and elicit emotions in you. So kind of that's what stories do. You become interested in what happens next as part of that story. Did Mike's DNA let him finish the dragon ride? Which fortunately it did. So a few more sort of resources that I found quite useful. There are names within this area of specialization, such as Stephen Few and Tufte, who have really been groundbreaking within these areas of creating effective visualizations and infographics. Two that I've really found useful, so data storytelling with data and Rock the Viz. So this guy, Rock the Viz, Bill Shander, if anybody uses courses like Udemy or Coursera, then he's got courses on there, which I would certainly recommend you taking a look at. They certainly very clearly explain a lot of these principles. Now, I mentioned about hooking people's emotions into the data, and you can okay, how would you do that? So this is a kind of an interesting example of Spotify having an advert, and you can see that dear person who played Sorry 42 times on Valentine's Day, what did you do? What was that all about? So that suddenly your mind is now going, I wonder what they did that they had to play Sorry 42 times. And whether that will lead you to go to Spotify, I don't know. But it certainly gets you thinking about what we know. And it's a data point, yeah? So that data point has elicited an emotion inside of you. I mentioned visualization, data visualization, design principles. And it's an enormous topic. But I wanted to kind of just share some key principles around that. So this is something called Gestalt psychology, and it's kind of interesting because it's essentially saying that an organized, I'm going to read it out, an organized whole that's perceived as being more than the sum of its parts. So we've all kind of heard that sort of phrase in some form or other. So what's kind of interesting here, and there are several principles in this kind of psychology, and I've chosen 3 that I thought were quite interesting and possibly relate to some of the visualizations that you're doing every day, sort of cluster type analysis. So the first one is talking about proximity. And you can see that there's multiple balls there. What have we got? 5, 11, something like 15 or so balls. But you actually perceive it as 3 groups, simply because of the way that those balls are positioned within space. Similarity, hopefully it's kind of coming out on the projector, but we've got 3 groups of balls, which are a combination of blue and green. But your brain is perceiving all the green ones as being related in some way, simply because of that color. So it's kind of amazing how your brain works and how your visual system is interacting with what you're seeing on the screen. And you can think about how you could bring these principles into play with respect to the reports and visualizations that you're creating with the tools that you have back when you're at work. This notion of closure, even though there's a dotted line, so it's a broken line, you perceive it as being a whole rectangle, just because of the way that the mind works. One other example is called pre-attentive attributes, and what this essentially means is that you almost subconsciously pick out details and information without kind of looking for them. So this is a classic example that's kind of used within those books and those courses that I mentioned earlier on. But essentially it's like a visual cue that's subconsciously processed. Now, how many occurrences of the number 3 can you find there? So you could go through that and you could count them up, and at some point your eyes might get all boggled and you have to start again. But if you highlight those 3s just in a different color, something as simple as that, suddenly makes it a lot easier for you to see how many occurrences of that number 3 are on that slide. Now, how can you apply these kind of things in a really simple way to data visualizations? So here's a bar chart that I created in Oracle Data Visualization, and you think, well, there's nothing wrong with that, but you can actually improve it quite easily. So let's sort the data. We'll highlight the largest bar in green, and we'll put an annotation on it. So we've suddenly drawn you into the story of that data that I'm trying to tell you by using these kind of notions of graphic design, if you like, and those principles that we mentioned. The next example is a data of revenue by date, and it's at a very small kind of day level, and you're thinking, okay, I can potentially I can see that there's maybe seasonality in that data where we've got the peaks. However, using our tools, just by adding 2 lines, you can suddenly start to explain that chart. So we've added 2 reference points. We've added an average. So you can start to see where the data is showing above average. And we've actually put a trend line on there. And using our tools, it's really easy to do this. Single clicks, add trend, add reference line. And you can see that it's trending up over the second half of that data. So suddenly we can see that revenue is trending above average in 2016. And that's just by adding 2 lines to that very, very noisy chart. And, think back to the cycling data. When we had the ER plot, maybe I shouldn't call it the ER plot, but that there was a lot of noise in that data, and just by adding reference lines, you can start to see where you may be improving, over time. I've got a couple more examples before I hand over to Stuart, who's going to give you a brilliant example of how you can tell a story using data within Oracle Data Visualization. Has anybody ever heard of this Anscombe's quartet? So there's a lot of talk at the moment about machine learning, and machine learning at its core is making use of principles and algorithms such as statistics. So what we have are 4 sets of data, and interestingly, anyone mathematicians in the audience? It's from a statistical perspective, and these are descriptive statistics on the right-hand side, so things like the mean, the variance, correlation between the X and the Y, yeah, it's all the same for those 4 data sets. However, if I visualize that data, you can suddenly see that it's a different story from the visual perspective. So this is really showing how it's important to combine statistics with a visual representation of the data, which brings me on to Oracle Data Visualization. So this is the product that I work in, product area that I work in as a product manager, and that was our homepage. So visual analytics to us is about exploring hidden relationships within your data, within your organizations, getting insight and value out of the data by doing this sort of visual analytics, and sharing the narrative that you come up with using our tools with your colleagues. So it's no point in actually doing the storytelling unless you actually tell it to somebody. So using these techniques of data storytelling, you can hopefully have a more powerful way of influencing the people that you're giving that report to or telling that story. You may be trying to get greater headcounts for a particular project by using a data-driven narrative. So this is some examples of the types of visualizations that are possible with Oracle Data Visualization. Some sort of geographic map type representations. But one of the things I think is really cool around Oracle Data Visualization is that you can actually create data infographics. So this infographic was actually created using the tools Oracle Data Visualization and being able to add layers of images to move objects around the palette. So conveniently, and as if I'd planned it, we have actually released version 3 of Oracle Data Visualization Desktop today. So this is quite a long list. I'm not going to go through each of these. I'll let you read them, of the new features that have been added to Oracle Data Visualization Desktop today. You can go to OTN if you're not already using it and download it. You can run it on your laptop. If you have any Excel spreadsheets or there are quite a lot of data sources that we support. It's quite likely that you may have some Excel on your laptop. Then you can suddenly start using that within Oracle Data Visualization. In addition, we have a mobile app called Synopsys. If you go to the appropriate app store, if you've got an iPhone or an Android phone, then you'll be able to download Synopsys, which is a free app, and start ingesting your spreadsheets in there and doing data visualization as well. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Stuart, who is part of Red Pill. We've also got Kevin in the audience as well, who was key in putting this story together. So do you want me to knock it into...
Yeah. Actually, it would be cool to show a project, which I think is already open. I'll do it later.
Cool. All right.
So first off, it's good that you showed pictures of both myself and Kevin, because Kevin actually developed the story that I'm going to tell you. If you think it's really good, that's because of the delivery. If you think it's not so good, that's because of the content. So I'm not a Windows guy. How do I get this
Yeah, no.
up there?
It's tricky, isn't it? Yeah. Good question.
2 Mac guys are going to try to figure it out.
Yeah. All right. Let's try that.
Yay.
No.
No, I can't see it here now.
No. I'm trying to mirror it.
It's mirror, right?
It's that one, isn't it?
Is that it?
Yay.
You can all clap. That was it. That was it. Yeah. So first off, I think it'd be good to show you how I got to here, right? So this is the Data Viz tool, Data Viz desktop to be specific. And I opened up a project. The project has a lot of visualizations already built in it. And we've also used something called Insights to be able to add sort of kind of bookmarks. And you can kind of think of it like a slide deck if you want to deliver a storytelling, but it's live data, right? So it's easy for me to go into visualization mode, which gives me the full palette. So in this case, I'm not going to be discovering the data. I've already done that. But what I'm going to do is try to tell you a story. So I'm going to weave a narrative of several visualizations that I've pinned together with the entire purpose of trying to get a response from you, elicit a response from you. Now you can think about this in terms of when you go to work, the sort of responses may be emotional or otherwise that you're trying to get from people. Agreement, trying to build, a community or collaboration with other members of your team. I'm going to try to elicit laughter, but we'll see how well we do it. So basically, this is a data viz project built on a data set from who is it, Kevin? It's what's it called? The National UFO Sightings. Yeah. So it's basically an organization that's been around, as you can see. We have sighting data going all the way back for almost the whole century. Actually, longer than a century. And right now, it's a website you can go to fill out sightings that you've seen. They've been capturing it for some time, so obviously they didn't always do it by website. I'm assuming maybe there was some sort of mail-in process at some point. Now, that aside, we can certainly start to see some trends. There's certainly some things happened along the way, okay? We're going to dive into each of these sort of areas of the timeline, but we can certainly see some things went on right around in this time frame. We can also see that, of course, in the modern era, we certainly started to see an uptick that began somewhere around 1994. Several different sort of things happened along the way. So I'm going to tell you a story about what I think causes some of these upticks, okay? So this is me using the natural browsing capabilities in the DV desktop. This is identical user experience to what's in the data visualization cloud service. It's very similar to what's on OBIE on-prem. It's just OBIE on-prem is a few versions behind, okay? So this is me going to the next insight that I've pre-calculated. So we certainly see that in 1948, there is a definite uptick of activity, okay? And we can draw some conclusions about why that is, but I've given you a narrative about why I think that is, obviously, right? I've given you a visual cue of what I think that reason is. Notice that as a constant, I have put the number of sightings prior to this period as a constant throughout this timeline. How powerful is that constant when you take a look at this timeline? It gives you a clear indication that not only are things going up, but they're going up relative to the prior time frame. Okay, does that make sense? And of course, I've given you a narrative telling you I think this has something to do with Roswell, right? Roswell occurred in 1948. I think, unless the government is lying to me, which I'm sure they're not, the book is pretty much closed on what happened at Roswell. It wasn't alien activity. Of course, I've seen several movies in Hollywood, and there's no way they would lie to me, right? So there's probably something else going on. But regardless of any of that, whether it's real, whether it's not real, it's certainly, I will argue, made UFOs enter the national consciousness, right? And anytime something enters the national consciousness, you're on the lookout for things, right? So regardless of whether this was the first strike in a mass invasion or simply a weather balloon with some dummies in it, it certainly caused people to start thinking about aliens. This is highlighting a new feature in 3.0, which is when I set a trend line. You can see the trend line right here. I also have the constant. So I've done a constant in similar fashion to I did in the last visualization, which is to show you the prior period. Now I'm showing you a trend line because we definitely have some ups and downs during this period. But during this entire period, the U.S. space program is going on. So it's important to understand that the trend is generally up, but we probably had a lot of ebbs and flows around whether people were getting fed up or sick of the space program, and then new rocket ships were launched, and new things happened in the program that probably caused these ebbs and flows. The new feature in 3.0 is this confidence gray area. Mike, do you want to explain that real quick?
Sorry, I was
tweeting. The confidence gray, which is
yeah.
I just wanted you to explain that real quick.
Yeah. So this is actually something that Stuart's only seen for the first time, because I took the rash step of, because I thought he was going to present from his laptop, of upgrading Oracle Data Visualization Desktop on my laptop this morning. I thought, yeah, Stuart's going to use his own laptop. And then I was like, ooh, it's not quite. So anyway, I got it working, and one of the things that has appeared, so this is no changes to this project file that Stuart and Kevin provided me with for the presentation. You can actually see now that we've got a confidence level grey zone around that trend line. So we're starting now to provide more analytic capabilities and insight just from that line. So you may remember when I showed you the static trend line, it didn't have that grey zone, but we've now started to add that in as a new feature in DV3.
Thanks for that.
Back to you. All right.
Just a slight detour from the storytelling experience. So the point I'm trying to get across here is that the power of the constant, the power of the trend line in my narrative. Those are two things that do not exist naturally in the data. Obviously, the trend line is calculated from the data, but you can choose whether to add it or not to add it. The constant is 100% narrative from me. I want to draw the distinction between prior periods and this period by putting a constant line. Okay? So, we noticed that 1994 time. 1994 through 1995 was perhaps the largest uptick. That just so happens to correspond with the first season of the X-Files. Raise your hand if you've never heard of the X-Files. I know my audience. Thank you.
I was watching it on the flight over.
Were you really?
Yeah, the first episode.
Oh, it's fantastic. So, in case you don't know, this is about two FBI agents that investigate paranormal activity. It's called in a box called the X-Files, and much of it has to do with alien activity, and the actual sort of arc that runs through the entire 6 seasons, has to do with a government conspiracy around covering up alien activity. So we definitely kick-started, and if you remember the first visualization I showed you, that is when the activity really kicked up. Now, as an X-Files fan, I'm telling you why I think this is the case. I also have a theory, Kevin, which I haven't researched, is this is probably about the time that they started being able to submit them online. But I'm an X-Files fan, and I'm telling you a story that tells you that this probably has to do with the X-Files. But anyway.
You can have competing theories.
You can have competing theories, but you know, I'm also showing you the deviousness of storytelling, right? I'm clearly giving one side of the argument, regardless. So as we start to take a look at this data set and drill in a little further, we can see that clearly the month that has the most sightings is July. Now, I have several theories for that. I'm trying to elicit laughter as the emotional response, but I could try to convince you one direction or another about why I think that is. Does anybody have any guesses? Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, that's a good guess. We're thinking more, we get into specific 4th of July in just a few slides. Why do we think July as a month? Yeah, very true. It's also summer, and we're out more. And we're probably out at night more during the summer months. This is my theory. I have not researched this. So, and the days are longer, right? Is that right? Yeah, days are longer. So we're out later at night. So there's a theory as well. But it's clear that July is the most activity. Now, what's really interesting is that the 1st and the 15th of the month also clearly have the most sightings. Now notice I've got a filter applied that is basically filtering this for the X-Files generation, okay? Which from now on, yeah, maybe I'll continue to call it the X-Files generation, but it's sort of the modern era, the X-Files era. So you might think that, well, the 1st and the 15th, that is, I'm telling you what it is, payday. And I don't know how far back that, how long the 1st and the 15th have been paydays, how far that goes back. Remember, we've got over a century of data. So you might think that this just applies to the modern era, right? So in the modern era, we automate things, paydays become more standard, legislation, whatnot. But if where are you button? There you are. If I disable that filter, actually it's more pronounced when I look at the entire data set. Okay? So I'm not sure about this, to be honest with you. I'm not sure how far back that standard is for the 1st and the 15th being payday. Put that filter back on. So if I want to think about the modern era versus the X-Files era versus the overall data set, I just so happen to have a visualization for that. Now, usually when you do a scatter plot, you're taking and comparing two measures against themselves, okay? But during a narrative process where I clearly want to make a point, feel free to compare a measure against itself, which is what I've done here. Number of sightings, row count. One with the filter applied, just the modern era. One with the filter not applied. Row count versus row count. And find outliers that way, okay? So, although this visualization perhaps won't make sense with every sort of data set, remember, I'm telling you a story. I'm in control of the narrative. I'm trying to convince you of something. So this visualization makes tons of sense in that context, okay? Now, those of you that were guessing fireworks, right? And talking about the 4th of July. Well, it just so happens that day 185 is clearly the day with the most sightings over the modern era. Okay? And this, because day 185 is not always the 4th of July, I just have a visualization to show you sometimes it's not, but this is when it is, and this is when it isn't. And so clearly, the 4th of July has some, has legs in explaining why there's more sightings. So some of you guessed fireworks. I have another theory. Does anybody have one? So that's the day that we're all out in the middle of the night looking up in the sky. So whether we are misrepresenting fireworks, we have a visualization that talks in a minute about the shape of the sightings, so there's some information there. But competing theory is it might just have to do with us being out looking up at the sky at night more on one day of the year than any other day of the year. Payday going, so sorry I didn't get into that, right? So payday, going to a bar and being out at night. I skipped right over that, my apologies. Absolutely. Alcohol consumption. So when do we go to bars? At night. We probably walk home more than we drive, hopefully. So we're walking through clear open skies maybe in some cases. So yeah. So this is what's called a polynomial trend curve, and that is where I have applied a sort of a trending line on top of a raw data set and broken it up into quarters. So the data doesn't naturally break up into quarters, but there's no reason I can't break the data up into quarters to kind of show you some of the natural sort of sighting data across, quarters don't necessarily equate to seasons, but they kind of do. So there's a seasonality to this, and we can look at and see that clearly the summer, or at least the third quarter, with that 4th of July day sticking out like a sore thumb across the data set. Okay? Sightings by, and I've alluded to this already. Sightings by hour. We do have the filter applied of the X-Files era. 9 and 10 o'clock are clearly the time where the most sightings occur. And again, I think I've alluded to that. That's when it's dark, and that's when we can see all those shiny lights. Does anybody know why they put so many lights on those spaceships? Especially if they're trying to come in incognito.
Space.
It's dark in space. That's right. That's a good point, Mike. Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, that is the time that's when it's dark. And these spaceships, for whatever reason, have all these lights on them. So that's when we get to see them. Come on. This is the one that didn't upgrade. Okay, thank goodness. We had trouble upgrading this one visualization in 3.0. So what we're looking at is sort of a sighting density visualization. It washes out a little on the screen. My apologies for that. But what we're looking at is, again, with the same filters applied of the X-Files era, day 185. I'm building a narrative, by the way. I'm drilling into the data as I go. Day 185 and the hours of 9 and 10. I'm showing you a density of sightings during that very specific time. Okay? And we definitely see that there's something going on here in the Midwest, something going on here in the northern West Coast. So let's drill into that a little bit and see what we can find out. So this is the outliers of sightings against duration. So this is, I will say proper use of a scatter plot, because if you're telling a story, anything's a proper use of a visualization if you get your point across. But this is typically what we think of when we think of a scatter plot. And that is plotting to one measure against another. And this helps us define outliers. The outliers are done automatically by the tool. I didn't have to go in there and do calculations to talk about outliers. The tool does it for me. So I can see, though, that I have a lot more. So this is, my apologies, this is number of sightings across the x-axis, and the y-axis is the duration of the sightings. So we can see we have outliers in the Midwest that has to do with number of sightings, but our real outlier is California, or the West Coast, for both number of sightings plus the duration of the sightings. So in California, the sightings last a long time. I don't know why. Any theories? Marijuana's legal? Maybe? I don't know. Medicinal only? I can't remember. So now let's move on. I'm having a little click issue here with this mouse. There we go. So when I talked earlier about the shape, this is a visualization that is doing a lot of things. For one thing, it's showing us duration of the sighting, but it's also plotting. What's the technical term of this visualization, Kevin? It's a tree map. Yeah, sorry. Just a tree map that's showing me, that's comparing the, got an update there, Mike. That's comparing the duration of the sighting with the duration, with the row count, and the shape. Okay, so we use the size of the box, or the size of the individual section. That tells us the duration. The color is telling us the count, or the number of sightings. So what we can see is that from a duration perspective, disk, flying saucers, those last the longest. Okay, now that kind of makes sense. They sit there and they hover, whereas fireballs and flashes of lights, there's a lot more of those, but they don't last near as long. That's a lot of information to get across with one single visualization. And this was really easy to build in the tool. Something that I can't say for other tools, how easy it is. Okay, so there's a lot going on there, but it's all clearly digestible. By the way, I didn't tell you, I've got the filter applied of our outlier states. Okay. Now we're getting into the word cloud. And Kevin, I don't know if you noticed sky and sky. So let's just pretend that sky period doesn't exist. That'll be best for the, no, I'm just kidding. So this is a word cloud. This is a word cloud that shows us, so somehow in the sighting data, you're able to put your descriptions. So my guess is in the online form, there's an area where you can describe it. It was a flash of light. It was a flying disc hovering right above me, etc. I'm guessing prior to the website, you were able to write this down and mail it in. And this is just a word cloud that's looking at the uses of, well, just like any word cloud, the common uses of or words that appear more regular than others. Okay, and you can see that bright and sky. Again, we are in that filtered area. We've removed a bunch of the, pronouns, conjunctions, etc., that are not of any value, and filtered on that same data set of the modern era in our outlier states on day 185. Okay. And this is just showing you the difference between two different ways to visualize sort of the same data set. From a narrative perspective, what is it you're trying to get across? What response are you trying to get from the recipient of the story? And this just shows the two sort of different ways that you can try to visualize the same thing. If bright is what you're trying to get across, I think that's probably a more meaningful visualization. We also have, what is this, Kevin? The average. So this is the ability to give you the average to show you that clearly we have a couple of words that are well above the average. Okay? And then this is me wrapping it up like you do in a slide deck, like you do in any story. In conclusion, UFO sightings occur more in the summer and the fall, specifically in the month of July, and notably on the 4th of July. Seen most at night, hours 9 and 10, Midwest and the West Coast. Their rise in popularity or frequency seems to correspond to some key events, especially the release of the X-Files show. Truth is out there. So do you have any closing remarks? Yep. So hopefully this gave you some idea of how you can use this tool to tell a story. Now use this power responsibly. You do have the power to convince people of certain things, whether that is agreement, whether that is happiness, whether that is confidence, whether that is laughter. So use the tool to try to tell and narrate the tool in such a way that you're trying to tell a story. Because if you tell a story, they will listen. So with that, Mike and I say thank you very much.
Just before we go,